The signals of play. Play fighting appears to be important to the development of social species, but an important question is how an animal might signal that aggressive-looking behaviors are, in fact, play. Research by Beckhoff and colleagues has suggested 3 manners in which a play session may be distinguished, but the one most relevant to the study of communication is production of play markers, specific and highly stereotyped behaviors that can serve to initiate and maintain the play context. Among dogs, juvenile wolves, and juvenile coyotes, a bowing motion is often associated with bouts of play. A bow occurs when an individual bends on its forelimbs but remains standing on its hind legs and may be accompanied by a tail wag and bark. To examine whether bowing serves as a play marker, Beckhoff analyzed the temporal placement of bows within recorded play sessions. The bows did not occur at random, but instead were used immediately before or after an action that is typically used in dominance or predatory interactions, e.g. biting with side-to-side shaking of the head. That is, the bows appear to be primarily used to mark instances in which another behavior might be misinterpreted. The cognitive mechanisms underlying play communication are not well studied. According to Beckhoff, play markers may serve to communicate a message akin to "what follows is play" or "this is still play." Yet while this description may characterize the function of the signal, the underlying representational content, if any, is unknown. Other means of distinguishing play from aggressive contexts appear to be available, as many species that engage in play fighting do so without any discernible play markers per se. Facial expressions such as open mouths with teeth covered by the top lip are present in play in many primates, for example, and may also serve to communicate a play context. Play signals in general, thus, may provide meta-communication by altering the significance of other signals that would otherwise be associated with fighting and dominance. Rooney, 1999, for example, observed that the outcome of some games, like tug-of-war, does not impact real-world dominance relationships, here between a human and dog, suggesting that play signals can serve to keep the results of play fighting context-specific. Teaching language to animals. In the second half of the 1990s, there was a series of attempts to teach human language to great apes. In hindsight, the studies seem inevitable. They occurred at a time when research in animal learning was synthesizing with interests in cognition and ethology, when field studies by Goodall and others were revealing the complex social and tool behavior of chimpanzees, and when linguists like Chomsky, 1968, were proposing that humans had a species-unique innate language module that allowed for universal grammar. A logical question to ask, therefore, was if any animals could learn language. At the risk of giving away the conclusion of this section, the answer to this question is now accepted to be no. Yet, some of the main studies will be detailed here because they are revealing in terms of what animals did not learn. The studies also played an important role in stimulating research and new methodology in the study of language development in children, which in turn further pointed to the differences between the language-trained apes and children. Even if chimpanzees, for example, are exposed to human, species-typical language environments, they do not develop in the same way as a child. Some of this was already known earlier in the 1900s, before the main thrust of the ape language studies. In the 1930s and 1940s, 2 husband and wife teams, the Hayeses and the Kelloggs, each raised a young chimpanzee in their home, figure 12.8. Both of the chimpanzees, Vicky and Gua, came to use some human artifacts, e.g. spoons, but the endeavor to get them to produce speech sounds failed. Also see box 12.1 and see box 12.3 for further consideration of speech. We now know that chimpanzees lack the anatomical substrates for speech, and this encouraged the first phase of ape language research to attempt to try again by teaching language through a non-vocal medium. Figure 12.8, Raising infant chimpanzees in the home. Early studies of ape language ability attempted to teach language within the setting of a human home. As chimpanzees develop into larger juveniles and adults, They are unable to live safely in a setting such as this. Box 12.1, FOXP2 and the genetics of language. Speech and language disorders have long been thought to involve the mutation of genes, particularly because certain disorders run in families. For example, across 3 generations of the KE family, researchers use coded names to protect privacy. Approximately half of the members have a verbal dyspraxia, an impaired ability to complete the coordinated movements necessary for speech. The disorder affects expression and articulation, but comprehension is preserved. After studying the difficulties faced by affected members and using neuroimaging and genetic techniques, researchers identified mutated gene FOXP2. This gene codes for a protein that controls expressions of other genes, serving as a gene regulator in the brain and other organs. There has been great interest in the evolution of FOXP2 and comparisons of the nucleotide and amino acid sequences of human FOXP2 and animal FOXP2. Nomenclature varies slightly for the animal versions, have been completed. Although a number of nucleotide changes have accumulated since the human and mouse lineages diverged approximately 70 million years ago, only 3 amino acids have changed in the human sequence. 2 of these 3 changes are present in humans but not the great apes, suggesting that the changes are relatively new, occurring only 4 to 6 million years ago. Some have estimated that this represents a selective sweep in which the advantageous genotypes spread quickly through the human population. There is indication based on DNA extraction from fossils that Neanderthals may have already had the changes, though this does not imply that Neanderthals spoke as modern humans do, since there are, of course, other genes involved in language and speech. The findings also do not indicate that the KE family members represent a reversion to an ancestral state, as the mutation is fundamentally different. The animal FOXP2 has also been the focus of much study. Songbirds, for example, use social learning mechanisms when developing species-typical songs. See Chapter 13, and the pattern of FOXP2 expression in the brain of one species of songbird, the zebra finch, appears to be similar to that of the mammalian brain. When individuals are engaged in song learning, FOXP2 appears to be upregulated in the same regions of the brain that had previously been assumed to be associated with song learning, and further, interfering with FOXP2 expression results in incomplete and inaccurate learning. More work is necessary to fully determine the behavioral role of FOXP2 across species. In humans, it is possible that the skilled, coordinated movements related to FOXP2 expression have been co-opted for vocal communication, and like in songbirds, FOXP2 may be implicated in the development of circuits that are important in learning of vocal sequences. Importantly, though, FOXP2 is simply one piece of a much larger puzzle of the evolution of communication, but it hints at the promising future of interdisciplinary, comparative research in this field. Box 12.2, Dolphin Signature Whistles. In 1965, Caldwell and Caldwell observed that individual bottlenose dolphins will often produce their own specific whistle, a signature whistle. Since the initial report, signature whistles have been observed for approximately 200 captive and wild bottlenose dolphins, as well as for members of other dolphin species. Some researchers have questioned the findings that dolphins produce individually specific whistles, but even these researchers have since acknowledged their existence. Signature whistles are thought to broadcast the identity of an individual. When dolphins meet, they often exchange signature whistles before joining each other. Dolphins live in a fission-fusion society, with individuals merging and separating with larger and smaller groups, and vocal signals of identity may have been selected for in this dynamic social environment. Evidence that these whistles play a role in individual recognition comes from experiments in which researchers play back pre-recorded whistles through underwater speakers. In one such study, dolphins responded more strongly to whistles of related individuals than those of familiar yet unrelated individuals. Additionally, dolphins can learn vocalizations throughout their lives, and the signature whistle of one individual can become part of the whistle repertoire of another individual, though it is used only rarely. It is possible that the copied whistles are used to address the owner of the signature whistle, and in fact, individuals do appear to recognize their own whistle. For example, King and Janik, 2013, played back recorded signature whistles, as well as other whistle sounds, in the bottlenose dolphin repertoire, and signature whistles from other populations. Individuals only responded to their own signature whistles, and they did so by sounding back with the same signature whistle. Is a signature whistle, then, equivalent to a name? The fact that signature whistles are individually distinct does make them unlike other animals' use of species' general vocalizations when isolated, or even the use of group-specific signals for cohesion. Signature whistles are not solely genetically specified. They are learned by calves and often modeled after existing whistles in the group. Some have hypothesized that the whistles are used with the intention to contact a specific individual, though alternatively, individuals may learn that producing the whistles is associated with a desirable result. More information is needed to determine the underlying cognitive mechanisms allowing for the production and learning of signature whistles, and specifically, knowledge of the development and creation of the whistles may shed light on these processes. Box 12.3, Lip smacking, vocalizing, and the evolution of speech. Human speech represents a unique motoric and vocal feat. Box 12.1 considered the role of the FOXP2 gene in the production and evolution of language, and there has also been a growing interest in the possible evolutionary links between human speech and non-human primate facial communication. Gazenfer et al. 2012, for example, have proposed that primate lip smacking, i.e. rhythmic movement of the lips as they open and close in the absence of vocalizations, may be a precursor to speech. Support for this proposal comes from the fact that lip smacking has a 3 to 8 Hz rhythm, which is similar to the periodicity of integral aspects of speech in many human languages. Primate vocalizations, in contrast, do not share this feature with speech. The lips and tongue remain relatively motionless, nor do other primate facial movements like chewing. Until recently, there was no known example of a rhythmic primate vocalization that was produced while lip smacking. Geladas are Old World monkeys closely related to baboons. Males produce a vocalized lip smack, a wobble, during affiliative interactions with females, though females occasionally produce the sound as well. Bergman, 2013, examined recordings of wobbles from 6 different males in the wild and found that the rhythm of the wobbles closely matched that of human speech. That is, the vocalized lip smack produced sounds that were structurally similar to speech. The original paper links to a movie file in which wobbles can be heard. The wobble of the gelada suggests that a combination of lip smacking and vocalizations can produce a sound with strong similarities to human speech. In turn, the original lip smacking hypothesis of Gazenfer and colleagues has gained some additional support. As Bergman 2013 notes, however, it is still unknown whether human speech actually did evolve in this manner, and further questions remain, such as how these sounds came to represent complex meaning and ultimately form language. Sign language. In the late 1960s, another team of researchers, the Gardners, attempted to teach American Sign Language, ASL, to a young female chimpanzee named Washu. The researchers working with Washu communicated in ASL, and Washu also learned by explicit operant conditioning. By 5 years of age, she was reported to know over 100 signs, but also of interest was the possibility that she would combine signs in meaningful ways. According to one anecdote, Washu was seen to sign waterbird upon seeing a swan. Other words were combined, such as "you tickle me." The reports were met with great excitement until the publishing of a deflationary paper 10 years later. In that paper, work with another chimpanzee, Nim Chimpsky, a play on the name of linguist Noam Chomsky, was reported. Nim was also trained with ASL signs and was observed to produce them in combinations, though many of the strings consisted of repeated words, and the mean utterance length remained small relative to that of developing children. The critical finding reported in Terrence et al. 1979, however, was that many of Nim's signs, and those of Washue's after reanalysis, were repetitions of signs that the trainer had just made. There was little evidence of the style of conversation that even young children can have. There was no real turn-taking, and most sign usage appeared similar to learned operant responses. A more recent review of the records from the Nim and Washue studies came to a similar conclusion. Shapes as words. Concurrent with the sign language studies, 2 other language studies used a system of visual symbols to represent words. The advantages of this method are that the trainer cannot inadvertently cue the chimpanzee or engage in non-standard signs, and further, the behavior of the chimpanzees can be more objectively coded. Disadvantages include the fact that the learning environment is stripped of the social pragmatics of human conversation, and that the procedures become more frequently based on operant conditioning. In work by Premack and colleagues, the chimpanzee Sarah was trained to associate plastic shapes with objects, figure 12.9. With these associations in place, Sarah was able to respond to questions that examined her ability to understand concepts like same, different, or color of. For example, if shown symbols for color of and a red apple, Sarah would pick a blue triangle shape, which had previously been associated with the color red. The focus of this work became to examine abilities such as analogical reasoning, which Premack proposed was an ability promoted by the initial training with the symbol system. Figure 12.9, depiction of a chimpanzee in a language study by Premack and colleagues. A chimpanzee, e.g. Sarah, would respond to questions displayed through plastic shapes. Another chimpanzee, Lana, was trained with a communication system consisting of a set of keys labeled with various shapes that was connected to a computer that would register all key presses. Roomba, 1977. Not unlike the sign language trained chimpanzees, Lana used the system to press a series of keys that led to a desired food. For example, she might press a series that translated to, "Please machine, give drink." Years later, even some of the primary researchers involved suggested that this paradigm held little similarity to actual language learning and could best be explained by operant conditioning, though they noted that chimpanzees may still be capable of language learning. Understanding English sentences. In part, the acknowledgement that earlier attempts to teach language had methodological flaws was influenced by the apparent language learning of a male bonobo, Kanzi, that occurred under different conditions. Kanzi began to learn the computer system by observing the training of his foster mother, Savage Roomba et al. 1986. After showing evidence of learning associations between the computer keys and their real-world reference through observation, Kanzi spent years interacting with Savage Roomba and her colleagues via a portable computer system, while the human caretakers used English words to describe objects and events, figure 12.10. In one experiment, Kanzi's understanding of English was examined by presenting him with verbal instructions from an experimenter who was unable to see him, and thus was unable to cue his actions. The instructions consisted of novel series of actions with a wide variety of objects, such as put the ball in the refrigerator, and Kanzi performed correctly on most trials. Compared to any other project that attempted to teach language to an animal, it is much harder to describe Kanzi's behavior as stemming solely from operant conditioning. It would also seem unlikely that bonobos have an evolved language ability that is not present in chimpanzees, though at this point, no studies have directly tested this. Psychologists and linguists are still learning about human language development, but it is important to note that even with the extensive training and experience Kanzi received, he has not achieved the language skills that most children have by school age. See also box 12.4 for research with dogs. In comparison, his productions are limited and consist primarily of requests rather than comments. Figure 12.10, depiction of Kanzi pressing a button on his communication system in work by Savage Roomba and colleagues. During interactions such as these, his human caretakers would frequently use English words to respond and to describe the environment. Box 12.4. Do dogs use fast mapping when learning words? As discussed in Chapter 10, the domestication process of dogs may have selected for reduced aggression and fear toward humans that led to increased attention to behavior, subsequently allowing dogs to respond to human social cues such as pointing. Dogs also seem to learn to connect human sounds, words, with objects in the environment, and judging by the performance of a border collie named Rico, they seem to be able to make these connections very quickly.